February 19, 1945. Iwo Jima. The Higgins boat rocked hard, but the LVT we rode in shook our teeth loose. The radial engine roared over 20 sweating Marines in the back. The air smelled of diesel exhaust, salt spray, and rotten sulfur. For 3 straight days, the Navy dropped thousands of tons of high explosives onto that rock. The sergeant yelled that nothing was left breathing on that island. The ramp dropped. Our boots sank deep into loose, black volcanic sand that felt like walking through wet coffee grounds. We gripped our rifles, waiting for the machine guns to open up on the waterline, exactly like they did at Tarawa. Instead, the beach gave us dead silence. Not a single shot fired, not one banzai charge rushing our lines. Do you know what happens when an enemy you expect to charge you suddenly disappears into the shadows? The real fear sets in. They stopped fighting with their hearts and started using their heads. You are going to learn why the famous banzai charge actually became the greatest tactical mistake Japan made against us. You will see how one specific machine, the tracked amphibious vehicle, broke a beach defense doctrine that the world thought no army could ever crack. Finally, you will hear about the shocking order a single Japanese general gave to his men, an order that changed the course of the Pacific War and cost the lives of thousands of my friends. We thought we understood how the enemy fought, but we were walking blindly into a meat grinder engineered by a man who knew exactly how to bleed our supply lines dry. The silence on that black sand was just the intake of breath before the slaughter. If you want the version of this war that they do not put in textbooks, stay with me. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. The silence on that beach was the hardest moment of my life. Most men think troops feel relief when nobody shoots at them during a landing. The truth is, that quiet chewed on our nerves because it meant the rules had changed. The enemy was not dead. They were just waiting. To understand why they stopped charging at us, you have to look at what the Marine Corps machine did to their old way of fighting. We brought a level of industrial firepower that made their ancient warrior codes obsolete in a matter of hours. The Japanese Imperial Army built their entire strategy around dying with honor in a massive frontal assault. They learned the hard way that honor does not stop 30 caliber armor-piercing rounds. They had to throw away centuries of tradition to adapt to our tactics. They traded their swords for shovels and turned that island into a fortress of hidden angles. Back in early 1942, the Japanese High Command looked at the American soldier and saw weakness. Their intelligence reports claimed we were individualistic, soft, and incapable of handling the physical wear of a real campaign. Their military doctrine leaned hard on spiritual superiority, a concept they called Yamato Damashi. The plan for every island was simple and rigid. They would meet us right at the waterline, pin us down on the sand, and then launch massive frontal assaults to sweep us back into the ocean. They believed their spirit would break our lines. They held this belief tightly until we met them in the jungle at Guadalcanal. We fought them in the dark, and they sent wave after wave of infantry against our perimeters. Our defensive positions held, and their formations broke against our guns. That was the first time they realized their spirit was running headfirst into an industrial engine that did not sleep. The math at Guadalcanal favored our hardware. The Japanese infantry carried the Arisaka bolt-action rifle. It was a precise weapon, but a soldier had to manually cycle the bolt after every single shot. We carried the M1 Garand. Our rifle gave us 8 semi-automatic rounds. I still hear the distinct metallic ping of the empty clip ejecting, a sound that meant another 8 rounds were instantly ready. When a Japanese platoon charged our lines, they faced a wall of lead they simply could not match with bolt-action rifles. A standard Marine squad could put out 3 times the volume of fire of their Japanese counterparts. We did not need to aim perfectly in the dark. We just needed to keep the trigger pulled. The sheer density of our bullets dropping their men started to change the minds of their officers. The gap in firepower only grew wider as we moved closer to their home. By November 1943, the reality of our machine hit them at Tarawa. Admiral Keiji Shibasaki boasted that 1 million men taking 100 years could not conquer his island. He built his defenses right on the beach, relying on coral reefs to trap our Higgins boats in the water. He was right about the boats, but he did not count on our tracked amphibious vehicles. The LVT-1, our monster with tank treads, simply crawled right over the coral and delivered Marines straight to the sand. The treads chewed through the obstacles. The beach defense doctrine failed in 3 days. Shibasaki died in his bunker, and almost all of his 4,700 defenders fell. The Japanese High Command stared at the reports from Tarawa and realized their beach defense manual was a death sentence. If they kept fighting us on the waterline, we would drive our tracked machines all the way to Tokyo. The final proof that their old ways were dead came in June 1944 on Saipan. The Japanese launched the largest banzai charge of the war. More than 4,000 men rushed our lines in a desperate wave. They met the Browning M1919 machine gun. Our gunners were putting out 400 to 600 rounds a minute. It was not a battle, it was an assembly line of death. Thousands of Japanese soldiers fell in a matter of hours. The smell of burnt powder and copper blood hung heavy in the humid air for days. A charge of 500 men against our entrenched positions resulted in 500 dead bodies and 0 ground gained. The mathematics of the banzai charge were fundamentally broken. They threw their bravest men into our gun barrels, and we just kept feeding belts of ammunition into the receivers. They were trading 100 lives for a few feet of dirt. The Japanese command structure also failed under our fire. In their doctrine, if an officer fell, the unit froze or threw itself into a suicide charge. The Marine Corps built initiative into every rank. If our lieutenant took a sniper round, the sergeant stepped up and kept the men moving. If the sergeant dropped, a corporal took the radio and pushed the squad forward. Our momentum never stopped, no matter who took a bullet. Every time they tried to break us with a frontal assault, our non-commissioned officers just tightened the line and directed the crossfire. The Japanese saw that killing our leaders did not stop the machine. We adapted on the fly while they waited for orders from dead men. Their reliance on rigid hierarchy became a fatal flaw against a force that decentralized problem-solving down to the 18-year-old kid carrying the rifle. The enemy needed a new way to fight us. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi took command of Iwo Jima and studied the ashes of Tarawa and Saipan. He was 53 years old and had previously lived in the United States as a military attaché. He drove across our country and saw our massive steel mills and auto plants. He understood our industrial capacity far better than his own superiors did. Kuribayashi knew that fighting the Americans on the open beach meant fighting the United States Navy, and nobody wins a gunfight against battleships. He decided to turn the island itself into a weapon. He fought his own hardline officers who demanded glorious suicide charges. He threatened to execute any commander who ordered a premature banzai attack. He chose practical attrition over honorable death. I want to know what you actually thought the Japanese strategy was before you heard this. Drop it in the comments. Many people still hold the myth that the Japanese soldier fought blindly, simply rushing to his death while screaming for the emperor. That era ended in 1944. General Kuribayashi despised the banzai charge because it wasted military resources. He ordered his men to abandon the beaches and dig into the volcanic rock. Under his command, they carved 18 kilometers of interlocking tunnels beneath the surface of Iwo Jima. They built subterranean barracks, hospitals, and ammunition dumps. They removed the element of human emotion from their defense and replaced it with cold engineering. The men who dug those tunnels knew they were digging their own graves, but they dug them with precision. They were no longer fighting to win the war. They were fighting to make our casualty reports so high that our politicians would beg for a peace treaty. The era of the honorable charge was officially dead and buried under 10 meters of solid rock. Another common error is the belief that naval bombardments destroyed island defenses before the infantry landed. We certainly believed it. For 72 days, Task Force 58 dropped thousands of high-explosive shells onto Iwo Jima. We watched the island disappear under clouds of smoke and fire. We thought the Navy had turned the place into a lifeless parking lot. We were dead wrong. The naval guns merely moved the dirt from one side of the island to the other. Kuribayashi's troops sat quietly under 10 meters of volcanic stone, listening to the explosions above them. The massive naval guns could not penetrate the subterranean fortress he had built. When we stepped off the landing craft, the enemy was fully intact and waiting for us to walk into the kill zone. The Marine on the ground had to do the work manually, one cave at a time. The heavy artillery failed to break the Japanese resolve. Kuribayashi issued strict new rules of engagement. His orders banned any defense at the waterline. He demanded that every single soldier kill 10 Americans before dying. To achieve this math, he relied on the geometry of hidden crossfire. His engineers positioned their machine gun nests to face sideways along the beach, not forward toward the ocean. This meant the guns fired in enfilade, raking across our lines. You could not see the muzzle flashes of the men shooting at you until you had already walked past their position. The interlocking fields of fire ensured that stepping out of one kill zone put you directly into another. The island was designed to absorb our initial landing force without resistance, pulling us deep into a web of pre-registered artillery coordinates. The Japanese commanders sat by their radios in the dark, watching the beach fill up with our men and equipment. The trap was set with mathematical precision. That brings us back to the black sand on D-Day. When we rushed off the ramps, the volcanic ash sucked our boots down to the ankles. Running was impossible. You had to drag your legs forward, carrying 30 kilos of gear glued to your back by cold sweat. The geothermal heat radiating from the island baked the air to 50 degrees Celsius in some spots. We moved off the beach, waiting for the crack of rifle fire, but the silence held. The beachmaster signaled the next wave of boats to land. Hundreds of Higgins boats and LVTs disgorged thousands of Marines, tanks, and supply crates onto the narrow strip of ash. We were packed shoulder to shoulder, a massive target painted black against the gray water. We felt a strange sense of victory, thinking the bombardment had actually worked. We did not know the enemy spotters were looking right down at us from Mount Suribachi. Kuribayashi let the beach choke with men and machines. He waited until the congestion was so dense that a single mortar round could not miss. We were moving inland, our boots heavy with the abrasive sand, when the first whistle cut through the air. It was not a chaotic barrage. It was a calculated, synchronized strike from hundreds of hidden artillery pieces. Mortar shells rained down on the landing zones, shattering LVTs and tearing through squads of men. The black sand erupted in geysers of sharp rock and shrapnel. There was no cover. You could not dig a foxhole because the loose ash simply collapsed back in on itself. We were exposed on a flat plain, taking fire from guns we could not see. The men next to me dropped, their gear shredded by steel fragments. The beachmaster shouted into his radio, trying to coordinate fire support. What happens next took less than 4 seconds. 4 seconds that ended 81 days. The artillery was just the beginning. As we pushed forward to escape the mortar fire, the hidden Nambu machine guns opened up from the flanks. Their high-pitched mechanical chatter cut through the explosions. We took fire from the left and the right simultaneously. Men were hit, but we could not find the shooters. We fired blindly at rocks and shadows. It took us hours of bleeding in the ash to realize the terrible truth. The enemy was not on the island. The enemy was inside the island. Every time we passed a mound of rock, a steel door slid open behind us, and a machine gun chewed up our rear guard. When we turned to return fire, the door slammed shut, leaving only solid stone. They were operating beneath our feet, popping out of spider holes to shoot, and vanishing back into the earth. The old Banzai charges felt simple compared to this invisible slaughter. We needed a new way to fight a subterranean war. The answer came in a tactic we called the blowtorch and corkscrew. Because we could not call in naval gunfire to destroy a target we could not see, we had to get up close. Small teams of 4 or 5 Marines crawled on their bellies through the volcanic ash. Snipers fired at us from higher ground, their Arisaka rifles cracking in the smoke. We kept our heads down, using the craters made by our own artillery for temporary cover. We inched our way toward the concrete pillboxes hidden in the rocks. We had to maneuver within 15 meters of the bunker slits to deploy the blowtorch. The men assigned to this job carried the heaviest burden. They wore the fuel tanks on their backs, making them the primary targets for every Japanese rifleman in the sector. It required a slow, crawling advance under constant, overlapping fields of enemy fire. The blowtorch was the M2 flamethrower. Once the team got within range, the operator stood up, exposing himself to the enemy guns, and pulled the trigger. A 15-meter stream of burning napalm shot directly into the narrow slit of the bunker. The intense heat illuminated the dark volcanic rocks with a bright orange glow. The napalm stuck to the concrete and burned everything inside. More importantly, the fire consumed all the oxygen in the confined space of the bunker. The men inside suffocated even if the flames did not reach them directly. The smell of the burning fuel mixed with the sulfur of the island, creating a thick, nauseating cloud. The operator had only seconds of fuel to use, so he had to make the burst count. As soon as the flames cleared the opening, the second phase of the micro-tactic had to be executed instantly before the enemy deeper in the tunnel could react. The corkscrew followed immediately. A second Marine sprinted forward through the smoke and threw a satchel charge directly into the smoking aperture. This was a heavy canvas bag packed with C2 explosives. The fuse burned fast. The Marine dove back into the ash just as the charge detonated. The shockwave snapped our teeth together and collapsed the entrance of the cave, sealing the bunker permanently. The explosion sent a cloud of black dust and concrete fragments raining down on our helmets. This sealed the tunnel system at that specific exit, trapping the remaining defenders underground. We did not bother trying to clear the tunnels room by room. We simply locked the doors with high explosives. This relentless sequence of fire and pressure was the only reliable method we had to dismantle the defensive network. It was a terrifying, close-quarters demolition job that required perfect timing from exhausted men under heavy fire. We repeated this blowtorch and corkscrew tactic thousands of times across the island. Every single pillbox required a team to crawl through the sand, expose themselves to fire, burn the oxygen, and blow the door. The casualty rate among flamethrower operators and demolition men was staggering. We lost officers in minutes, but the non-commissioned officers grabbed the gear from the dead and kept the teams moving. A corporal would take the flamethrower, burn the bunker, and take a bullet. A private would grab the satchel charge and finish the job. Kuribayashi's nightmare came true. Our small units did not stop advancing, regardless of how many men fell in the ash. The flexibility of the Marine Squad bypassed his perfect engineering. We paid for every inch of ground with blood, but the machine kept rolling forward. We fought through the sulfur and the heat, slowly blinding the underground fortress one concrete eye at a time. On March 26, 1945, the island was officially declared secure. The battle was over, but the silence that followed was heavy. Kuribayashi's new doctrine extracted a massive toll. Of the 21,000 Japanese defenders on that island, nearly 18,800 died fighting in the dark. They never surrendered, and they never wasted their lives in a useless banzai charge. They fought from the tunnels until we sealed them inside forever. They proved that fighting with cold logic was far deadlier than fighting with spiritual pride. The generals succeeded in making us bleed for every rock. We sat on the black sand, watching the medical teams carry the stretchers down to the water. The beach was full of shattered machinery and torn gear. The victory felt hollow. We broke the most perfect defense they ever built, but the mathematics of the butcher's bill were hard to accept when we looked at the empty spaces in our platoons. The cost of tearing up Kuribayashi's new manual was staggering. We lost over 6,800 men dead and another 19,000 wounded. For the first and only time in the Pacific War, the Marine Corps suffered more total casualties than the number of Japanese dead. The numbers confirmed that the enemy had found a way to bleed us dry. We left thousands of our brothers buried under the white crosses near the airfields. The men who walked onto the transport ships to go home carried invisible shrapnel in their minds. The smell of burning sulfur and cordite never really washed out of our uniforms. We learned that sheer firepower was not enough to break an enemy who refused to stand in front of it. The island taught us that the bloodiest days of the war were not behind us. The enemy had found the blueprint for making an invasion of their homeland a numerical impossibility. The methodical resistance at Iwo Jima, and soon after at Okinawa, shifted the course of global history. The American High Command looked at the 26,000 casualties it took to capture one tiny strip of volcanic rock. They ran the math for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of the Japanese home islands. The civilian population was already training to fight using the exact same defense and depth tactics we saw on Iwo Jima. The military calculators projected that a mainland invasion would cost more than 1 million American casualties. The prospect of fighting a subterranean war across an entire nation terrified our leaders. That cold, numerical horror was the primary military factor that weighed on President Harry Truman. Months later, he made the decision to use the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The meat grinder of Iwo Jima directly influenced the dawn of the nuclear age, changing the mechanics of war forever. I still feel the grit of that black sand in the treads of my boots. We went into that fight believing we were facing a fanatic enemy who would rush our guns and die for honor. We found a calculating ghost who forced us into the worst bloodbath of the century. The Banzai charge ended on the beaches of the Marianas, but the real terror began in the caves of Iwo Jima. We won because a Marine with a satchel charge and a flamethrower refused to stop crawling forward. The history books often smooth over the rough edges of what it took to dig an army out of the earth. They focus on the flag, but they forget the sulfur and the heat. We carry the memory of those 18 kilometers of tunnels so the world remembers the true cost of that black rock. If this story deserved to be told, make sure someone else gets to hear it.